flowing to Rome, those local rulers could do as they pleased. Because the Bible is written to Christians and Jews, and its stories are primarily located in Israel, you could easily get the idea that Israel was the center of attention of the world. It was quite the opposite in my life. Rome was the center of the world, and Israel barely existed. When Jesus was born in Nazareth, it was the equivalent of him being born in Bugtussle, again in Oklahoma, and tiny, even by tiny town standards. He certainly would not have been considered a threat to Rome, and Herod would have been expected to deal with Jesus and his followers in any way Herod deemed fit. In your time, when someone wants to write a biography about the most famous person in the world, they have mountains of digital information at their fingertips. An author's task is to sort through the vast amount of information and decide what is worthy to include in a person's life story. It is up to the reader to decide whether the information is credible and if the story really lines up with reality. I'm sure it has gotten more difficult for today's readers to discern such things. Many of your current writers have their own agendas, often outweighing the supposed true story. In my time, things were a little different. Virtually all of the biographies and many of the history books were written at the paid request of rich people or powerful politicians. It was expected that the author would slant the storyline to favor whomever was paying for the book. Sometimes the slant would be so severe as to make the story unrecognizable to those familiar with the situation. However, that didn't matter to most readers as long as the story was good. My situation was quite different. I was only interested in hearing the truth. In fact, one of the reasons I chose to listen to Luke was because of his esteemed reputation for gathering relevant facts and coming to accurate conclusions. His training as a doctor taught him how to do exactly that. He insisted that this final scroll should be irrefutably accurate. I knew that would be a challenge because he would be describing miracles and the actions of God. Since Luke wrote his story many decades after the death of Jesus, you may wonder what information sources Luke used. I insisted on knowing his sources. There are many people who knew Jesus well, who were still alive and could tell their stories directly. Many people who had already died had told their stories to others, and Luke gathered as many of those as possible. He was personal friends with many of Jesus' apostles and family members. He questioned them at every opportunity. Mark's written account of the life of Jesus was an especially valuable source since one of Mark's primary sources was the Apostle Peter. There were other accounts about the life of Jesus that have been written. Many of these later disappeared from history, so future scholars will be puzzled about the source of some of Luke's information. As a point of interest, my friend Matthew also consulted some of the sources Luke used. That partially explains why some of their passages are so similar, but there are two other factors coming into play. In my world, it was quite acceptable to copy or partially copy the writings of other people without giving them credit. So if a passage looks exactly the same in Luke's account and Matthew's, you didn't know whether the original source was Luke, Matthew, or someone else. Second, and related to the previous point, all of the New Testament writers wrote under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit. He may very well be the reason why some of the passages are written word for word. In many of the myths of the Roman and Greek gods, the gods have children in rather interesting ways, and those gods and children have curious superpowers. Here is the first challenge that I had for Luke. I wanted him to convince me why the Romans and Greek gods were myths, but Jesus and his birth wasn't a myth.
See the dilemma? I was writing about miracles and healings. I was not a witness to the miracles and healings of Jesus, but I was a witness to many of the healings and miracles of Paul and many other apostles. With my training, you can assume that I would not easily be fooled by fake healings and miracles. You can also assume I did not write about them if I did not fully believe they were true.